engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious leaders, innovators, and people who are ready for the next level and beyond.
Welcome to this Pure Reinvention Project podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Misty Elliott. Hey, Misty, how are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm good.
Hey, we had a chance to sit down and talk to just a really outstanding young professional that's just amazing in how he looks at the Pure Reinvention Project. A guy by the name of Josh Lord, who is a membership development professional. Misty, as you had a chance to listen to his interview, what struck you as what people need to be listening for?
Well, I think Josh is just a dynamo. He's been in the association industry for a long time, even though he's a young, emerging leader still. But he's really tapped into the necessary changes associations have to make to move forward and to grow and to be relevant in the next years. So I think you should just tune in and really listen to what Josh is saying, because he has a lot of insight from years in the industry.
One of the more interesting surprises that I heard as I listened to the interview was Josh's comment, listen for where the role of the disruptor may come from. I believe it may surprise you. I think sometimes we always know what the disruptor in the reinvention process is going to be, and I think Josh has clued us in that maybe it will surprise us in where that role of disruption came from. The other thing I heard him talk about was he kind of coined the phrase Reinvention Strategist, and as you listen to the role of the strategy in his conversation, I think that will be very interesting, Misty, as people kind of start to pull their takeaways out of this conversation with Josh.
I think that's exactly right. Let's listen to this and see what he has to say.
It is always so much fun to talk about reinvention, and we're here with our friend Josh Lord, who is, in my estimation, someone who has really taken this concept of reinvention and applied it in many different ways. Josh, as you think about reinvention, what is one of the main ways in which you see reinvention being used in your work world?
I think associations in general, and this includes the one that I'm currently working for, are really challenged today to think about how they can capitalize on what's happening outside of the association sector that's really changing our customers' perceptions of value, cost, service. If you think about the way that Amazon has really revolutionized the purchasing experience, we can't help but understand that the associations of today are dealing with customers that are being influenced by organizations like Amazon in terms of purchasing and Google in terms of information. When we're trying to serve those that are paying a membership fee to belong to our organization, if they're not having a purchasing experience that correlates to what they're doing in Amazon, if they're not being able to gather and find and obtain information in a way that correlates to their experience on Google, then we're underserving those groups. And that translates into non-renewal ratings. That translates into distrust in terms of the association's value. It brings up all sorts of questions that, frankly, end up driving customers and members away. But the problem is that we're so resource challenged and resource strapped, and the culture and the mindset of often the boards that manage these associations really don't understand how these external experience are driving the expectations of our customers. And so I think if we think about reinvention and where we need to head as a community in the next year to 3 to 5 years, it's how can we be Google and Amazon-esque without the resources to match those service levels.
So you said a number of things there that I want to try and follow up on. One which was you were indicating that a business that was flat or declining in revenues might need to look at their business model and perhaps reinvent themselves to get the boost that they're looking for. And it seemed like you were advocating that boost, that there were examples of that boost all around us. You were using examples like Amazon and Google, but that what you were trying to communicate was we can't keep doing what we had been doing so much of in the past. Can you talk about what you see in businesses who have either stayed too long doing the same thing, and perhaps talk about why they tend to stay doing the same thing too long?
complacency and culture, and I think it permeates from the top. If you look at the governance structure of most associations, the process by which you become at the head of the table is typically long drawn out, and by the time that you reach the executive committee or the board, you've been around in the association for so long that you are so into it now that you're not seeing these external influences. You combine that with leadership and management structures that are more interested in protecting their own turf rather than responding to market cues. You look at staff who take a lot of pride in doing what they've always done because for a long time it always worked. The bottom line is the Great Recession, the technological innovations of the early 2000s have dramatically re-landscaped the environment that we're in, and yet the ones who are leading our businesses right now are adhering to paradigms that frankly no longer exist. And instead of looking for opportunities for reinvention, what they're looking for is how can I keep things adequate enough for the time that I'm here, so that way it will be incumbent upon someone else to figure it out because it's too big for me to deal with.
So if you're a leader in one of these leadership roles in an organization and you are beginning to see the complacency that you're describing, if you're beginning to see some of the culture that's permeating is not conducive to the kind of performance that the business deserves to achieve, how do you see the organization building the accountability in to create some of these changes that are necessary?
Well, I think before we even get to the accountability piece, there's got to be a disruptor somewhere. The disruptor is either going to be a new competitor, it's going to be an emerging leader, it's going to be a new hire, it's going to be a new board member. It's someone who senses something is wrong with this business, and they go out of their way to broadcast their view as best as they possibly can, given the hurdles that they know they're going to encounter. And then this is also predicated on the notion that you've got to have a group that's going to be responsive to listening to this disruptor, whatever it is, an internal force or an external force, and assuming that the message gets to the right people. Then I think we need to really look at ourselves as a staff and as an organization and realize that we're likely too close to our own business to be able to solve this on our own. And what we really need is a reinvention strategist, someone that's got a vision and an understanding of the market from the outside to come in and diagnose our business, to diagnose the business model, the membership model, the pricing and service mix, and to really force us to take a hard look at ourselves, our systems, our structure, our budgets, our programs, and our culture to really move the organization in a new direction. Because to be frank with you, the individuals that have been a part of this community for the longest are likely the ones least capable of leading the kind of reinvention that we need, and that's why we need outside help.
So you've talked about the role of a disruptor in this process. Let's just take that one simple concept and let's expand upon that a little bit. In your comments, you mentioned the role of the disruptor was an external person, a new board member, a new staff person, a new leader, but the key word you kept using was somebody new in the mix that was able to create a new dynamic. Do you believe that that is one of the critical steps in the reinvention process, is enough disruption to take the business out of its normal culture to allow it to be open to something different?
One of the quotes that I love is that everyone likes change until it affects them. And my personal view is that the organization likely will reach a point where it's so challenged in so many ways that a comfortable disruption has probably come and gone, and now we're looking at systematic change. We're looking at new membership models, we're looking at new product and service development, we're looking at governance revamps. There are few organizations that really respond well to these external market disruptions and really try to proactively manage it as opposed to reacting at the place where the train's already left the station. And so I think once organizations start getting a sense of something being wrong, the easy thing to do is to sweep it under the rug and say, well, we'll deal with this later. But that one initial cue, in my opinion, can be the make or break difference between an organization being successful in responding to disruption or really going through deep, systematic, and discomfortable and often expensive change.
So what you're doing, Josh, is building a really good case that the leader actually can purposefully create enough disruption, discomfort, as you have described it, either through external market forces or through some internal changes that could take place. But if that key leader brings some of that disruption into the organization, that starts to create the space for the kinds of changes that you're saying are very necessary in these businesses today.
That's correct, but I think the problem that we're seeing is that a lot of the changes, at least right now at the chief staff level, are you're trading pawns for pawns. We're not trading in a pawn for a queen. What we're doing is we're moving people around who have been a part of this business and this industry for long enough as to where they're really not creating new value. What they're bringing in is their old paradigms from their old business that got them through and allowed them to build a platform where they could be considered for these leadership roles, but they're really not bringing disruption to the table.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand in this phase that you're talking about now, after we create a disruption as a leader, we then have the option to either, in your example, you mentioned that we create a disruption and then we just replace that person with a person that has the same experiences and go right back to the same things. But there is an opportunity if we create a disruption, a space, and then we bring in somebody with a different set of expectations, or someone with a different skill set, or someone with a different way they're viewing the marketplace. So expand on the importance of that person's, how those different or new experiences that they bring into the group, while different, may actually be tremendously valuable to setting the organization up to be moving forward.
I can think of an example of an association that's not based in Michigan, but one that I have a high degree of admiration for. And when they had an executive staff or chief executive staff change about a year ago, they replaced the prior ED with someone very much cut from the same cloth. The board hired who looked like them, who talked like them, who they were comfortable with, and the disruptor actually came up as a runner-up. 6 months later, the status quo replacement ended up not panning out. And in the last 6 months, they've hired the runner-up, who's the disruptor, who's now working with few resources but has a big vision, and who's making a very positive impact in an organization. But it took a poor decision to lead to a great decision. And now we've actually replaced status quo with disruption in a very good way, and this organization's now excelling.
So what we need to do is help organizations not back into these kinds of decision-making models, but actually be able to understand what they look like on the front end. So the disruption creates the space creates the opportunity to bring in a new set of experiences. Isn't there more than just a new set of experiences that needs to go into this mix? Can you talk a little bit, Josh, about the role, and you mentioned this earlier, the role of an outside person who engages the board or the staff or the executive in a different way than the normal employee-employer relationship?
Yeah, you talk about space, and I think one thing that internal employees aren't afforded, whether you have great leadership from the board down or not, is you don't have the level of comfort in being truly candid. At one point in my career, I was reporting to a CEO who really I felt a level of comfort with that I've even felt with very few of my family members, to be frank. But at the same time, you're always guarded because the CEO has a responsibility to the business and to the board. And at times, as staff, you can't really capitalize on moving an organization in the way that it needs to be moved because you need to protect yourself And your CEO also has to protect themselves and their relationships. And so it takes a true outsider, someone who's often not familiar with any of the board members, with few of the staff, to really create a different dialogue that's not only more candid, but also is treated with a deeper level of respect, because as an outsider, when you're brought in, you're typically done so because you're viewed as a thought leader. And while your staff are also thought leaders, you just don't have the space, the candidness, the level of relationships that typically outsiders can have with the board and with the CEO that can be much more frank and much more earnest.
One more very interesting comment that you made that I want to drill down with, and then I want to finish up with, I think, probably four key understandings that I've heard from you. The first one being the role of disruption. The second one in the importance of creating space. The third one in terms of bringing someone or something, new experience, new person, new experiences in which are not like what has been there in the past. And in the fourth thing, which I want you to spend a few minutes and talk about, because you've alluded to it a couple of times but haven't really talked about it, and that is, do you really need a lot of in-depth resources to create reinvention? Because in a lot of what you've been describing have been organizations which have not had a lot of resources. They've depended on other assets other than financial resources to accomplish or create something new. So can you speak for a minute about some of these other assets that might be able to be leveraged in the reinvention process if an organization does not necessarily have financial resources?
Yeah, I think an intangible that I think we don't talk a lot about is heart and courage and loyalty. And I think if you find the right person that has the right heart, that's got a good perspective, that's got a solid vision, that individual may be willing to do things for your organization that don't fit into that typical expense revenue column. I think there are people who are around our community who believe in this notion of reinvention deeply enough that are willing to do things for leaders, for boards, and for organizations because they know it's the right thing for everyone's future. You know, the old phrase, rising tides lift all boats here, I think certainly applies. And so I think typically when we talk about reinvention, roadblocks get put up because we think cost, expense, disruption, change, it's all negative. What we fail to recognize is opportunity, collaboration, mutual benefit, relationship development. You know, there's a lot to be said for collaborating not only with a consultant or an external resource, but with your competitors. Imagine the great things that a lot of organizations can do that are all fighting for the same piece of a very small pie when we talk about discretionary income. If they collaborated with one another to create new value and everyone wins. Everyone right now, in my opinion, is focused on how do I ride out the years that I have left? How do I protect my turf? How do I avoid change so that way I don't have to confront the deep and systemic challenges that we're all facing? And unfortunately, that mindset misses collaboration, new developments, new relationships. And again, I don't think it has to cost a lot of money, but what it does have to cost is maybe some political capital, some time, some energy, some emotion. But ultimately, the organizations that choose to invest in this process are the ones that 5 years from now are going to be writing the best practices that the rest of us are going to be trying to catch up on.
Josh, it's been a pleasure. We hope you'll come back and join us again soon.
Thank you.
So, Misty, as you listen to our friend Josh Lord talk about the reinvention process and his take on where associations are now, what really struck you as a key takeaway?
I loved what he said about big companies defining the purchase experience for association members. Association members are out there every day and they are buying things from Amazon. They are looking to Zappos and those major companies to give them ultimate customer service and cater to exactly what they need. And I think that he's right on that associations are competing with that level of customer service.
Josh asked a really, really good question, and that is the current association culture aligning with the real world experience that its members are having as you so aptly said, Misty. And I think it's a wonderful question. And I think it has to do with this thing called changing perceptions, that the world is changing, and has the association adapted as well. I really like how Josh is asking the question, are associations aligning with what a member would experience away from the association to test for its own validity? I also really liked how he talked about the association needing to focus on the next 3 to 5 years, not to have a 3 to 5 year strategic plan, but just to make sure the association is going in a direction which aligns with where the real world is for the members to connect to. I think that connection just was really huge.
And I think to make that connection, you have to have somebody in there that's willing to disrupt the status quo, to push the boards out of their, what did he say, protecting their turf, out of that complacency of protecting their turf, to really get them uncomfortable and look for what's new and next and how they do align with what's happening today.
I think a lot of Josh's comments really aligned along the model of how are we going to attract in these new members going forward, and the kind of mission-centric associations are needing to make sure they're completely aligned with the real-world experiences. I just think there's so many interesting takeaways in this, Misty. Anything else before we wrap up?
I think we need to talk about his comment about the fact that associations aren't creating new value. That it aligns with what we're talking about here, and it aligns with reinvention. If you're going to reinvent, you need to create that new value. You have to go where your members are going to be so you can constantly serve them and provide and be that person they look to provide what they want. This has just been a fantastic experience with Josh and hearing his insight into how associations can move into the future. Thanks for listening today. You can always follow us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention and on Facebook. You can also go to our website, www.purereinvention.com, and find out more about us. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new episodes are available by following us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention, or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.